Well, I want to say Philip's book is remarkable. And
I'd like you to say that again.
yes, I know, but it is.
We should do it in a chorus.
Yeah. I wanted to talk to you about one aspect of it that I, in working for the UN, have experienced personally, and that is a kind of bureaucratic style of communication which has been variously described as bilge or bullshit. And I want to sort of just share with you a few thoughts about how this kind of bilge arises. For me, it's very concrete in the term sustainability goals, which supposedly orientate what the UN is about, but nobody knows what they mean. And there's a history buried to this. When Max Weber wrote about bureaucracy, he thought that all bureaucracy was going to be modeled on military commands. That is, the more you move down the chain of command, the simpler and clearer all the communications would be. If any of you served in the military, you know that there are rules about polishing your belt buckle, about polishing your shoes, and so on. And to Weber, this was bureaucracy, that clarity and hierarchy are inseparable. It made a lot of sense to him because he looked at civil bureaucracies like factories as modeled on military, where there's a division of labor, gets simpler and simpler the farther down you go. About 50 years after Weber wrote this, here in Colombia, there was a great kind of revolt against this on the part of Robert K. Merton, our most famous sociologist, and a visitor here named Michel Crozier, who wrote a book called The Bureaucratic Phenomenon. And their notion was that this pyramidal hierarchy of commands gets disturbed by the fact that people who have power want to assert it arbitrarily. So that they'll say, I don't care what the rules are, I've got power over you because I can contravene these, I can mess them up. It's kind of Trump idea, you know, that you assert your power by creating kind of the rule is what I say the rule is. And for Merton and Crozier, this was a kind of systematic disturbance that big institutions, big bureaucracies had more and more of these kinds of arbitrary assertions of power in terms of saying what I want is the rule. And that this conflicted with the natural tendency to decentralize and clarify rules according to this military logic of make it clearer, the simpler, the less powerful the person you have to deal with. Now, another 50 years later, after Merton and Crozier, we have a kind of different attitude towards, or a different understanding of bureaucratic bilge. And it is that there is something functional about ambiguity of rules in a way from the bottom up that allows people at the top control. There's a famous study of Hewlett-Packard, for instance, which is about what does it mean to model Hewlett-Packard's, some of its productive products that it makes on 3D printing. The top issues a command saying 3D printing is now the model for all printing. That's all it says. And below, as this study found, people are trying to say, well, what's that mean? And who gets control of the meaning of defining what 3D, you know what 3D printing is. what 3D printing means for a place like us who do two-dimensional printing. So you get a kind of conflict about who can furnish clarity. And the one who can furnish clarity is the one that gets rewarded by the organization. So the top spawns nebulous rules, and the bottom seeks in a bureaucracy to clarify those rules in order for the bureaucrats who clarify them to be rewarded. That, I'm sorry to say, is the story that I have seen in the UN over 30 years now in the pursuit of something called sustainability goals of the United Nations. These were promulgated at the top really in the 90s, based on generalizing somehow issues about climate change and climate sustainability to all aspects of what the UN was about. Everything should be sustainable. But that piece of bureaucratic bilge at the top is just like the Hewlett-Packard problem, which is, what's it mean? In my bailiwick, in the urban parts of the UN, we have spent 20 years in trying to find ways of defining how cities fit into the sustainability goals. There are 15 of them, and they're all nebulous, that were first defined in the 90s. People spend vast amounts of time trying to say, well, this is how we fit into goal 11, or this is how goal 4, subsection B3, would relate to the work we do. And the people who can do this bureaucratic exercise are the ones who get rewarded in the system, as I've seen, and are promoted. Whereas the ones who want to work the way Philip is talking about, loosely, without arriving at a difference, who say, look, it's all bullshit, but let's just go ahead and do it. We've got to, buy 40,000 tents for these refugees. Let's not worry about whether it's sustainable or not. Those people do not prosper in the system. So this is, I think, it's a different kind of phenomenon. And the advent of big data, which means that there are lots of resources to draw on, only makes it worse. We've got lots of information, but this kind of bureaucratic structure means that the very resources we have to define something only reinforce this, I'll stop, this problem about bureaucratic bilge. And that's why I find Philip's book so illuminating. We have to get out of this. It's pervasive, certainly in the nonprofit world, and it's self-destructive.